One thing we're going to do in Biology 1070 is each week we're going to post a little video that summarizes some of the key things that we've done, some of the key learning objectives, and try to give you a sense of what you should be getting out of the different things we're doing in class. So we're going to go through fairly quickly a review of the first two classes from week one. So first we talked a little bit about the idea of learning outcomes. These are really important. We will be providing these in front of every lecture, and as we mentioned in class, we actually use these to structure our assessments. So when we're writing the exam questions, putting together the midterms and so on, we refer specifically to these to make sure that that's what we're testing. So we will make sure these are posted. You should definitely incorporate these into your study habits of looking at what were we trying to get out of that particular lesson. So in the first class we were largely introducing the structure of the course, but also did a few activities aimed at looking at active listening, at talking about the relevance of active learning, and so on. When we talked about the structure of the course, one of the really important things we pointed out was that there are three major disciplines of biology or subsets of biodiversity that we were going to focus on: evolution, ecology, physiology. We gave definitions of what those are, and importantly we talked about how we're going to approach them through these inquiry cases. Specifically, we're going to begin with a core of sort of evolutionary concepts with some ecology and anatomy and physiology built in, but mostly focusing on evolution. In the second unit, we'll be layering on top of that a large amount of ecological information, concepts from ecology, and in the third unit, we'll be talking about a lot more physiology, but still maintaining those other core concepts from ecology and evolution. So that's the structure of the conceptual basis of the course. We pointed out that anytime you see a red box around a question, and those questions will always be posted on CourseLink, it's something for you to think about and explore on your own, and again, it's the kind of thing that we like to come back to when we're developing exam questions, because it's a conceptual or inquiry-based kind of thing that you can explore on your own. Did you want to?
Yeah, so if you're confused as to, hi, I'm here too. If you're confused as to what you should be doing with respect to that question, take a look at the slides, and it says we give you two kind of hierarchies, two kind of scales here: the biological levels of organization and the time scales. So if we actually go back to this slide here, you can see that we've got evolution, ecology, physiology. Ask yourself, what time scales are relevant? You know, do minutes matter at the scale of evolution? Do decades matter in ecology and physiology? Is a decade really relevant, or are we talking about something that happens on a much smaller scale? You can play around with those a little bit, and then you can apply them to the biological levels of organization. So, what's the importance of a decade or a generation to a cell that's part of an individual versus to a cell that's its own organism, that's its own individual? These seem maybe like sort of high level questions, but the more that you start to explore them, the more you're going to learn about how they're all connected.
The connections are very, very important. We talked a little bit about the importance of active learning versus just essentially memorizing stuff that we say, and this course is very much structured around the idea that developing skills and going through the process of scientific inquiry is much more important than giving you a collection of facts that you can memorize. So in light of that, we pointed out that learning is not just a collection of facts and memorization. It's a process. It also involves some skills that you can employ to enhance your learning throughout your life in any area that you might want to explore. And likewise, science is not just a collection of bits of information. It's a process of investigation that leads to those pieces of information, and also leads to efforts to explain those pieces of information. And all of that requires something other than just memorizing facts. And so we're really going to focus on that. So then in the second class, which was the Wednesday's class this week, we have a set of more specific learning outcomes. So these are looking at building your scientific vocabulary. Every discipline in science, every specialization out there has jargon, technical terms. It's important to start building yours if you're going to understand biodiversity science. And we're going to be working through a process of identifying important information from a collection of information that's available. And we're going to start talking about traits of organisms and so on. We reviewed the clicker question that we assigned on Monday that was your homework kind of question, and we wanted you to think about it. We went through why you would choose one or the other and some of the process of thinking about it. And we focused largely on this question about levels in the biological hierarchy or levels of organization and whether or not they count as nested hierarchies. And you may recall that the initial response on the clickers was sort of all over the place, suggesting that there was a bit of guessing, but we then worked through it as to how did you access the information if you did the homework. Remains to be seen how many people did, but this was something you could reflect on your own. But then we posted this, which was a summary of definitions of different levels of organization, and very useful, I think, a figure that shows some of those levels of organization. And we asked you again, which one is not like the others, which one is not nested, meaning which one is not made up of components that are the units of the level below. So, for example, a population is a collection of organisms of the same species, and an organ is a collection of tissues. And we determined that ecosystem is not like that, the reason being it is the collection of communities plus the environment. So it's the one that has an additional set of factors involved, so it's not quite the same as the other nested elements in that hierarchy. We just want to reiterate that the course structure is nested in the sense that we have evolutionary concepts at the beginning and in the center, and then we're building on top of that by adding the ecology concepts, and then building on top of that by adding the physiology concepts. So by the time we get to the third inquiry case, we're looking at these sort of concentric rings of concepts that are all connected but maintain that core in the first case. So we won't talk about muscles much in later units, but the concepts that we're deriving from this inquiry case will very much carry through all of the rest of the course. So we talked a little bit about what evolution is and why you'd want to study it from a variety of applied perspectives. And I pointed out that one of the ways we're going to talk about concepts in evolution, which unfortunately tend to be not that well understood, even if people accept the concept of evolution and have learned about it in the past, research shows that it's generally not a very well understood set of mechanisms. We're going to try and fix that, obviously, this semester. One of the ways we're going to address those concepts is through an inquiry case. And we started talking about the mussels in the Great Lakes region. We emphasized that there's no trivia in this course. You're not going to have to memorize details about mussels or specific information about them. That's not the point. We're using this as a way of illustrating core concepts and ways of investigating questions in science, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on in our assessments. Anyway, the first part was to talk about the larval types and the life cycle of these native mussel species in the Great Lakes region, the unionid mussels. Talked about the fact that they have a parasitic larval stage that requires a fish host to complete its life cycle, and then we started talking a little bit about some of the challenges of getting those larvae into the gills of fish, and how mussels have evolved different strategies for doing that. We talked about using basically mimicry of food sources. You package the Glaucidia into some form that looks like a prey item, and then it's consumed, and you can infect the gills that way. We talked about clamping onto the fish with the shell, then injecting, and we also talked about the evolution of lures that attract the fish, and then while the fish is trying to feed on the mussel, the Glaucidia will be shot out into the face of the fish and then basically infect them that way. We talked about simple and complex lures. Simple lures are very minor modifications of the mantle tissue that just look a little bit like something or move a little bit in the water. Complex lures, in the extreme case, look a lot like a prey item, like a fish or some kind of invertebrate prey. And we wanted you to investigate and think about some of these questions, like what are some of the advantages and disadvantages to having a complex lure versus a simple lure? What are some of the kinds of environments where you might expect complex versus simple lure to evolve? And after you've thought about that from an evolutionary standpoint, think about it from the perspective of developmental biology or physiology or ecology. And how can you think about where these kinds of lures might evolve, in what circumstances, and why they might be limited, and how complex they get.
one of the things that, hi again, one of the things that one of you asked at the end of class was, what's the difference between a simple and a complex lure? And it's a really good question because it's probably not super obvious, but what we mean by simplicity and complexity has to do with the amount of tissue or the diversity of cells that are put into the lure. Also the structures. Here what we're showing you is a very simple one in that it's just like a bunch of wavy things that look like hair, right? Compared to the fish-like structure, which is much more complex. It's got different colors, different tissues, different structures. It moves, it beats instead of just waves in the current. All of that stuff contributes to complexity. And we want you to really appreciate the fact that there are pros and cons associated with each strategy, and that things don't obviously get more complex as they evolve. There are many benefits to keeping things simple. So we want you to explore that a little bit more.
The last thing we asked you to do is to think about the very different life cycle and larval form of the zebra mussels, which are the invasive species. They do not have Glochidia, they have veliger larvae, which does not require a fish host and has a very different mechanism of dispersal. And we want you to think a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of this larval system versus a obligate parasitic larval system that requires a fish host, and some of the evolutionary and ecological consequences of having this kind of form versus Glochidia larvae, and what that means for the biology of the organisms in question.
So one of the ways that you can explore some of these questions is on the discussion board. There are a bunch of benefits associated with that. First of all, everybody can see the conversation. The other benefit is that we can see the conversation. So if you're getting off track, or if you want to say, hey, Dr. Gregory, can you weigh in here, or ask me to help as well, we can. And then everybody else can see the answers in the discussion. So these are excellent questions for the discussion board.
Mm-hmm. We also had this active learning strategy guide, study guide approach that was introduced, and this is a really great resource for you to start developing your own style of organizing your time, focusing your energies when you're studying. This is something that a lot of students who do really well in undergraduate stumble upon or develop on their own, but here you've got an example of one format for doing this that I think you might want to give a try. And it talks about how you can invest your time. The expectation for an undergraduate course here at University of Guelph is that you'll spend about 10 hours per course per week. That includes your contact time, so your in-class and seminar time or lab time or whatever else your particular course has, plus additional hours of reflecting, studying, reading, working through things on your own. This is a way to organize that time and make sure you're investing it wisely. So I strongly recommend you give this a try and see how it works for you. And we would also value feedback on it.